Most ancient buildings survive as suggestions: a broken foundation, a column stump, a scatter of stone, and then the rest is left to archaeologists, museum labels, and your imagination. But Roman arches do not ask you to imagine much. Some still span rivers. Some still cut through cities. Some still hold up the logic that made them work almost 2,000 years ago. Pont du Gard, Segovia, the Colosseum, the Pantheon. They do not just suggest Roman engineering. They demonstrate it. And that raises the real question of this video. Why do Roman arches still stand? Because Rome found a way to make gravity help. To understand that, we need to start with a very simple problem. Stone is strong, but only in a certain way. You can stack a huge amount of weight on stone and it will take it. But stretch stone across an opening, and sooner or later it begins to fail. It does not like bending. It does not like tension. It is strongest when it is being squeezed. For centuries, builders worked around that weakness. They used more columns, narrower openings, thicker walls. Horizontal beams could work, but only up to a point. And that point always imposed a limit on what a building could become. The arch changed that. Instead of one long beam trying to do all the work, an arch uses many smaller wedge-shaped stones, each pressing into the next. When weight pushes down, the force does not try to snap the structure in the middle. It travels down through the curve and out into the supports. The harder the load pushes, the more the stones lock together. That is the first reason Roman arches are still here. The arch takes gravity and makes it work for the structure rather than against it. Of course, that only works if the supports are good enough to resist the outward thrust. If the foundations are weak, the arch spreads and fails. But if the supports are strong, the system becomes remarkably stable. And that is what made the arch so powerful. It solved one of the oldest problems in stone construction. To be clear, Rome did not invent the arch from nothing. Earlier builders in the ancient world had used arch forms before them. Rome's achievement was different. The Romans made the arch ordinary enough to repeat, strong enough to trust, and ambitious enough to scale across an empire. That might sound like a small technical improvement, but it changed architecture at a much larger scale. Because once builders no longer had to fear the same horizontal cracking problem in the same way, the question changed completely. No longer, how wide can this beam go before it fails? Now it became, how much weight can this curve organize, and what can we build once it does? That is a different kind of confidence. And once the Romans understood that, they did not stop at a single opening in a wall. They extended the idea. Stretch an arch backward, and you get a barrel vault. Repeat arches in a line, and you get an arcade. Cross vaults together, and you can cover enormous interiors. Take arch logic as far as it goes, and eventually you arrive at a dome. That is the moment Roman architecture stops being a collection of buildings and becomes a system. Because Rome did not just use arches decoratively. Rome scaled them. That is the part people often miss. When we look at Roman arches now, we see beauty first. And fair enough. The surviving examples are beautiful. But we also have to be careful with that beauty. Ancient Rome was not a spotless white marble fantasy. Buildings could be painted, plastered, repaired, smoked, crowded, noisy, and weathered by use. What survives is often quieter and cleaner than the world that built it. But for the Romans, the arch was useful before it was symbolic. It was infrastructure. It was a way of organizing movement, water, crowds, and space. And that is what made it revolutionary. Because a civilization becomes much more powerful once it finds a construction method that is not just beautiful, but repeatable. Not just impressive, but practical. Not just monumental, but reliable enough to use again and again. That is exactly what Rome found in the arch. Aqueducts are the clearest example. Over about 500 years, Rome built 11 aqueducts to bring water into the capital from as far as 92 kilometers away. Most of that system ran underground, or close to the ground. But whenever Roman engineers had to cross a valley or maintain a precise gravity-fed line across broken terrain, the arch became indispensable. That is why the Pont du Gard feels so extraordinary. It is not just impressive because it is old. It is impressive because it still makes engineering visible. 3 levels of arches, a structure adapted to the flood behavior of the garden. Stone organized with such precision that even the positioning marks on some of the voussoirs can still be seen. And the numbers only make it more astonishing. The aqueduct it carried ran roughly 50 kilometers from Uzès to Nîmes and moved around 30,000 to 40,000 cubic meters of water per day. The bridge rises almost 49 meters above the river. It is not a decorative fantasy. It is a machine for controlling force, slope, and water across a hostile landscape. And that point matters more than people realize. The Romans were not building for a photograph. They were building for performance. The Pont du Gard had to do something very unforgiving. It had to preserve a tiny gradient across a long route so that water would continue to move by gravity and arrive where it was needed. That means the bridge is not simply a beautiful object crossing a river. It is a precision device embedded inside a larger hydraulic system. And once you see it that way, the bridge becomes even more impressive. Its beauty is not separate from its usefulness. Its beauty is the usefulness made visible. Segovia tells the same story in another register. Its Roman aqueduct crosses the city in 2 superimposed rows of arches, stretching 813 meters and rising to about 28.5 meters at its highest point. It carried water to the city for centuries and remained in use into the last third of the 20th century. And that is what makes Segovia different. It was not just preserved Roman engineering. It kept working. That is a huge distinction. A ruin can survive because nobody touches it. A working structure survives because it continues to justify itself. That is why Segovia feels almost unsettlingly alive. It does not stand outside the city like a dead monument. It still cuts through the urban fabric as if Roman engineering never entirely left. And then there is the Colosseum. This is where Roman arch logic stops looking like a bridge solution and becomes an entire building system. The Colosseum could hold around 50,000 spectators, and unlike many earlier amphitheatres, it did not depend on a hillside for support. It rose from flat ground using a dense internal network of barrel and groin vaults. What you see on the outside, those repeated arcades of arches, is not decoration pasted onto a solid mass. It is the visible expression of a structural system repeated over and over again across an entire building. That is why the Colosseum still feels so modern. It is not modern in style, it is modern in clarity. You can almost trace where the weight is going just by looking at it. But the real strength of the Colosseum is not just that it stood up. It is that it organized people. That is an underappreciated part of Roman architecture. The same structural logic that made big spaces possible also made circulation possible. Entrances, exits, corridors, stair systems, seating tiers, vaults, and outer arcades all work together as one controlled environment for a crowd of enormous size. In other words, the arch did not just help Rome build bigger, it helped Rome build smarter. And when you begin to look at Roman architecture through that lens, you stop seeing isolated monuments and start seeing a civilization that had learned how to turn structure into administration. Water could be moved. Crowds could be managed. Roads could be crossed. Public spaces could be enlarged. Cities could feel ordered. That is when the arch stops being a detail and becomes part of empire itself. And then the Pantheon takes the same logic even further. The dome might feel like a different idea entirely, but it is really the arch carried into a circle. What makes the Pantheon remarkable is not just the curve, but the mass behind it. Its drum wall is more than 6 meters thick, and the combination of geometry, mass, and material is what keeps it standing. Nearly 2,000 years later, the Pantheon still holds the largest unreinforced dome ever built, at 43.3 meters in diameter. And the Pantheon matters because it reveals something else about Roman thinking. The Romans did not only use arches to solve practical problems, they also used arch logic to create emotional effect. When you stand inside the Pantheon, the building feels impossible first and rational second. The scale, the height, the oculus, the mass of the dome overhead, all of it produces awe before it produces understanding. But the awe exists because the logic is sound. That is an important point, because it explains why Roman architecture remains so compelling. These buildings do not rely on ornament alone. Their emotional force grows out of structure. The engineering is not hidden behind the effect. The engineering is the effect. So that gives us the second answer to the title. Roman arches still stand because the Romans did not treat the arch as a trick. They turned it into a repeatable system. Bridges, aqueducts, baths, amphitheatres, vaults, domes. Once a civilization repeats the same structural intelligence across an empire, it gets very good at building with it. But there is still a harder question. If the shape alone were enough, every Roman arch would still be here, and they are not. Some collapsed in earthquakes. Some were dismantled. Some were quarried for stone. Some simply lacked the historical luck that survival demands. The Colosseum itself was badly damaged by earthquakes and then treated as a quarry for centuries. The Pont du Gard lost stones and needed later repairs. Countless Roman bridges and vaults disappeared entirely. So the real question is not just why Roman arches worked, it is why some survived for 2 millennia. And that answer is more interesting than simple genius. Geometry matters. Yes, but geometry alone does not carry a monument through centuries of flood, war, neglect, and reuse. Material matters too. Roman builders combined carefully cut masonry with mortar, and in some of their most ambitious projects, concrete. In the case of the Pantheon, the combination of massive support, intelligent weight distribution, and extraordinary material control is what made the building durable at such a scale. And material is only part of it. Site matters too. The Pont du Gard was not just dropped into a scenic landscape. Its lower principal arch is wider to help move floodwater, and the projecting fronts of the piers help deal with high water. Good Roman engineering was never only about the object. It was about the object meeting the place correctly. That idea might sound obvious now, but it is one of the real reasons these structures still command respect. Roman engineers were not only asking, "Can this stand?" They were also asking, "Can this stand here?" That is a much harder question. A bridge over a river does not live in abstraction. It lives in current, pressure, erosion, weather, and time. A public building in a city does not live in theory. It lives in crowds, movement, repair, neglect, and changing use. The best Roman structures survived because they were not just strong in a general sense. They were intelligently fitted to the realities around them. Precision matters too. An arch only works if force keeps flowing cleanly from one stone to the next. That means the cut, fit, and placement of the voussoirs matter enormously. At Pont du Gard and Segovia, You are not just seeing old stone, you are seeing organized accuracy. That is another reason Roman construction still feels convincing. Even now, long after the empire disappeared, the workmanship remains legible. You can still sense the discipline of the build. The stones do not merely sit there. They appear arranged with intention. And then there is the least glamorous reason of all: use. Some Roman structures survived because later societies kept finding reasons not to erase them. The Pantheon remained in continuous use and became a church. Bridges remained useful routes. Aqueduct lines remained valuable. Even damaged monuments like the Colosseum were eventually preserved because they had become too symbolically powerful to lose completely. This is one of the most important truths in architectural survival. Buildings do not survive on engineering alone. They survive on engineering plus relevance. A structure that remains meaningful gets repaired. A structure that remains useful gets defended. A structure that becomes symbolic gets protected even when practical logic alone would not save it. That is why survival is never a purely technical story. It is also a cultural one, and that gives us the third answer. Roman arches still stand because the best of them combined structural logic with durable materials, intelligent siting, careful execution, and enough long-term value to be repaired instead of erased. That is a better answer than saying the Romans were simply brilliant. They were brilliant. But brilliance alone does not keep stone standing. Systems do. And Roman arches survived in another way too. Even after the Roman world fragmented, the rounded Roman arch kept echoing through later architecture. Romanesque builders inherited it. Renaissance architects studied surviving Roman monuments to recover their logic. The arch did not only outlive Rome as stone, it outlived Rome as an idea. That part of the story matters because it shows us something rare. Most building technologies rise, dominate for a while, and then disappear into history. Roman arch logic did not do that. It remained visible enough, persuasive enough, and adaptable enough that later builders kept learning from it, whether directly or indirectly. That means Roman architecture was not only durable, it was teachable, and that is a different kind of power. A structure can survive physically and still be forgotten. But Roman arches survived physically and intellectually. They stayed in the landscape, and they stayed in the imagination. Which means Roman arches survived twice. First as engineering, then as influence. And maybe that is the deepest reason they still matter. Because when you stand in front of one of these structures, you are not only looking at ancient success, you are looking at a design principle that kept proving itself across time, across geography, and across changes in civilization. That is extraordinary. So why do Roman arches still stand? Because the arch let Roman builders turn stone's weakness into strength. Because Rome scaled that logic across an empire. Because the best examples combined shape, material, site, precision, and later maintenance. And because some became too useful, too visible, or too meaningful to vanish. But maybe the deepest answer is this: Roman arches still stand because they still explain themselves. You can look at one and watch the idea working. The load gathers, the stones press together, the supports take the thrust. The ground receives the force. Nothing is hidden. That is why these structures still feel alive. They are not just relics. They are legible decisions. And once you see that, Rome starts to look less like a city of ruins and more like a city of surviving strategies. It also changes the way you look at architecture in general. Because the buildings that last are rarely the ones that rely on spectacle alone. They last because they understand material, force, sight, and use well enough to survive history itself. That is the real lesson of the Roman arch. Not that ancient builders were magically better than everyone else, but that durability is never accidental. It is designed, it is tested, it is maintained. And when all of those align, a structure can go on teaching people long after the world that created it has disappeared. And that leads to the perfect next question. If Venice is also a city built against the odds, why does one great historic environment still feel stable while the other seems to be slipping downward into the water? In the next video, we're looking at why Venice is still sinking, and why one of the most beautiful cities on Earth is still fighting its own geography. Thank you for watching. More hidden stories are waiting in stone. What should Archmyst uncover next? Tell us below.